Welcome Ennis and friends of history. We're pleased that you're here today to the Hebrew section of Myrtle Cemetery, where Fannie Raphael is buried along with her family. We're at the gravesite of Fannie Raphael, whose home is pictured here, stands at 500 West Ennis Avenue. Prior to building this great mansion, she and her husband Edward lived on Knox Street. Fannie Jolesk Raphael was born August 17, 1871 in Covington, Kentucky. If you'll notice, that was about the time that Ennis was established. It was established in 1871, and then it was actually incorporated in 73. Fannie, would be 153 if she was alive today. We have to keep remembering these early settlers of Ennis and keep our history alive. She was the first president of the Ladies Hebrew Cemetery Society, which was very special to her. Her family was prominent in commercial world of Ennis. Her father, William Jolesk, who's buried in the next section over, founded the Jolesk dry goods store, which once rivaled Neiman Marcus for its quality of ladies' clothing. This store was located on the corner of Ennis Avenue and Main Street, but unfortunately it had to be demolished. They also had a branch in Corsicana, and that's where she met her husband, Edmund Raphael, a banker and a civic-minded man. He was instrumental in the growth and progress of Ennis. Edmund was born in 1865 and died in 1927. They were married in 1894. Fannie was involved in charitable work most of her life, including helping found a Jewish school that operated briefly in Ennis. In the early 1900s, she sat on civic committees with her cousin Mamie Cerf, whose home was located just across the street from theirs on Ennis Avenue. That sadly was demolished also, and now is where the Ennis Public Library is. Fannie and Edmund had 5 children. Ernest was born in 1896, Raymond in 1897, Wilhelmina, Aileen, and Julia. The boys were successful in various lines of work, and the girls married well, except for Julia, who never married. Edmund and Fannie felt this was best. It was specified in their will that Julia would never marry to retain an inheritance, for which they were wholly criticized. It was not uncommon for the youngest child of a good family to look after their parents, and that's what they wanted. Julia had an interest in amateur theatricals and appeared in a number of plays in the 1920s and 30s, and perhaps her story will be told more later. Financial problems occurred after Edmund's death, which caused quite a family struggle, almost ended in the possession of their beautiful home. However, that was all settled in time, and when Fannie died of a heart attack in 1947, the home was left to Julia. Although Julia was placed in a nursing center and their beautiful home fell into disrepair, it was saved and is now a showcase in our beautiful city. So that ends the story of Fannie Raphael. If you'd like, you can come up and look at a picture of her and her family and the home as it was seen historically on Ennis Avenue, and then have a look at the family gravestones here. These particular type of gravestones are called ledger style. You'll notice that they are as if you're reading from a scroll or from a book. So the Raphael family is here, next one up that way, and then the Jolesk family, and then there are other Jewish families of the Ennis during that time, which are Livingston, which is this tall one here with the angel on top, and Freeman, which was another section over.
I want to welcome you to the gravesite of Frederick Rankin and his wife Elizabeth, and I want to tell you a little bit about them. The Rankins, Frederick was born in February 15, 1795 in Kentucky. His father was Colonel Robert Rankin, and his mother was Margaret Berry Rankin. Colonel Robert Rankin served in the Revolutionary War Army of Virginia. He fought at Brandywine, he fought at Germantown, he fought at Stony Point, and he participated in the siege of Charleston. After the war, Colonel Rankin was captured, and then he spent the rest of the war in a prisoner camp. But after the war, he moved to Alabama and Mississippi and took his family with him. In 1822, the subject of our marker came to Texas. He was 28 years old when he moved to Texas, and he came as part of Stephen F. Austin's Old 300. And the reason that Stephen F. Austin were bringing colonists into Texas was that the Comanche and Apache were raiding coastal towns in Texas, and Santa Anna wanted to establish American colonists as a buffer between Mexico and the Apache and Comanche, and let basically the Americans deal with it. So in July 7th of 1824, he received a CTO and a labor. And a CTO was 4,583 yards square of land, and a labor was 177 acres. And the 4,588 yards, if a mile is 5,280 feet, the CTO was about 2 miles, I think. It was a big piece of property. And his property was awarded in what later became Harris County. The census of March 1826, our subject was listed as a farmer and a stock raiser. His wife, Elizabeth, was named. He had 2 sons and 3 servants in 1826. He eventually had 8 children. By 1830, his house at the head of the San Jacinto River was considered a polling place, and that's where people would come to vote. He then moved to Spring Creek, where a lot of the soldiers who had fought in the Battle of San Jacinto moved. And then in 1832, he moved from there to Polk County. And then in 1849, he was at a meeting in Houston of the Old Texians. And the reason for this meeting was the quieting of land titles, because a lot of the Texas Revolutionary soldiers never actually claimed their land, but what they did is they sold their head right, and then other people bought that head right, and then they sold that to somebody else, and it got sold and sold several times, and there was a lot of clouding of title. So since Frederick Rankin had been at the battles and all, he kind of was able to sort some of that out. Then in 1850, he lived in Polk County, and then after that, he moved to Navarro County. And by 1874, he was living on Chambers Creek here in Ellis County, 18 miles south of Waxahachie. And there's now a town of Rankin, or community of Rankin. There used to be a larger town, but it's a community now. And this is his son in the middle, Napoleon Bonaparte Rankin, and this is Napoleon Bonaparte's tombstone, and they are buried, he and his family are buried at Elm Branch Cemetery, which is just outside of Bardwell, and at one time that was all part of the Rankin property. I just learned yesterday that Napoleon Bonaparte Rankin in 1885 had worked a hard day or something, and he wanted a jug of whiskey brought to him. So he asked his 2 daughters, and one of them was Maddie Virginia, and she was 13 years old, and one of them was Annie Garton, and she was 17 years old. And it was on August 6th of 1885, and so they brought their dad the jug of whiskey, and one of the girls had a candle, and she held it too close to the jug, and it exploded. And it killed both girls, and it burned the house. So because of that, we think he left out near the Rankin area and bought a lot in Ennis, and the lot was at 307 North Sherman Street, which later became the P.C. Matthews, and then later became Felix and Tia Atwood's, and now Steve and Judy Knatzer live on that lot. But in 1908, it's a very different house. So it's interesting how circuitous history brings us around in circles. So getting back to Frederick Rankin, he passed away July 2nd, 1874, and in 1936, the state of Texas erected this marker as part of the centennial dedication, and his father's marker was erected at the same time. Markers all over the state were erected to honor the history of Texas. So thank you very much for coming, and I'm very honored to be able to speak about such a man who served well and who settled this country and who helped win the independence of the state of Texas. And he's buried right here at Myrtle Cemetery in Ennis, Texas. So thank you.
I want to welcome y'all to this stop on your tour, the bugs. I'm just so glad to see you here. This is a cemetery plot, as you'll see, of Dr. William C. or W.C. Wathen, a husband of M.M. Wathen. And you'll notice there are two other markers on this plot that I'll be talking about. Dr. Wathen was married to M.M. Wathen, and her name was listed as Mary, Minnie, and Minerva on different documents. In fact, her death certificate says Minnie, but in a lot of the census, she's called Mary. So take your choice what her real name was. I don't think they had real names back then, whatever their parents called them. And you'll notice there's not really a marker for Mary's, the place she's buried, but I believe she's buried here with her husband. I believe she loved him very much, and she lost him very young. She was only 44 when he died at the age of 47. She never remarried, but surely she had a chance with the large estate that her husband left her. The census records show in 1900 census record shows that she had one child, but none living. Some of the census asked that question, most did not. But they never is a child listed on any of the census for them. And William, he graduated from the Louisville Medical College in 1858 and moved soon after that to Anderson County, Texas. Well, that's where Mary and her family lived. Her dad Isaiah, her mother Nancy, her mother Nancy, and brothers. And I don't believe she had any sisters. So she and William were married in 1860 in Anderson County. And then he joined the Confederate Army in 1862 and served as a surgeon in the Confederate Army. The memorial and biographical history of Ellis County states that he asked for a furlough while he was serving in the Confederate Army to go home and be with his wife because he heard she was ill. So he went back to Anderson County and never really went back to serve. So they traveled by horseback 75 miles from Anderson County to Ellis County. And they loved the country so much, they moved here. And then her family actually joined them. Well, her brother was already here. Her brother's name was Zebulon King. So he was the first president of the Ellis County Medical Society. And he retired in 1875. Just 10 years later, he was dead. He died in 1885. The Find a Grave website states that he died of congestion of the bowels after a few days' sickness. And again, I believe he was the love of Mary's life. And after her death, she was left to manage all the property that they have. And the same book says that she was a woman of extraordinary capabilities and sound business judgment, making several good investments in Ellis County property. So she lived alone in their home at 310 West Denton, pictured here at the bottom. And she lived there until her death in 1928 of apoplexy, which is basically a stroke. Her home is described in the history of Tabernacle Baptist Church as one of the most well-appointed homes in Ennis. And they had a meeting there when they formed Tabernacle Baptist Church. And although Mary and William had no children, she was instrumental in raising a nephew and a niece named Jaretta and Lycurgus Smith. They were her aunt's children. And you'll notice we have another marker here. You can't see what it says. On the back it says Isaiah King Sr., who was Mary's dad, and it lists him on the census as a physician also. And he died in 1878. And as I said, he was, I don't know if I told y'all or told them. He was born on a boat on the way to America. It's recorded, and I can't believe that I saw a birth certificate, but some kind of record said he was born on a boat on the way to America. Settled in Maryland, moved to Missouri, and then they moved to Texas. And the other marker that we see for this child, Luma Hume Pennington, born in 1880 and died in 1883. And I thought, whose child is this? Because they had no children and they had no relatives named Pennington. So I did a little bit of research, and I found that R.B., her dad, was a doctor. And she's listed, this child is actually listed on the 1880 census at 3 months of age in Virginia. So they must have traveled after that census to Texas, because they had another child in 1882, which they named Minnie, and then she died in 1883. So they must have traveled back to Virginia, because in the next census, they're back in Virginia. And they had a son, and they named that son Ennis. I think that's to remember their time here and to remember where their little child was buried. I believe that R.B. and Dr. Wathen probably knew each other because they were both doctors. And even though he was a dentist, doctor is a doctor in those days. And so I believe out of the kindness of their heart, they allowed the Penningtons to bury their little daughter here because they had nowhere else to bury her. And so I'm so glad y'all came to this tour, and your next stop will be down the road at Jack Lummus's site. Thank you for coming.
Welcome. We stand at the graveside of Jack Lummus, the man whose name has been embraced by the city of Ennis, naming Lummus Middle School in his honor most recently. We are profiling famous and not so famous people on this tour. On this stop, we remember a famous son of Ennis, Lieutenant Jack Lummus. Jack was born in Ellis County on a cotton farm. He attended Ennis High School, where he was a star in football and track. He received all district honors for football for a couple of years. He graduated May 1937, received scholarship offers from Baylor and Tulane. He enrolled at Baylor, and there he was an outstanding baseball and football player, quite a stud. Before he left Baylor, he already signed a minor league baseball contract with the Wichita Spudders, and uniform contract with the New York Giants. On May 26, 1941, an Army Air Corps recruiter came to the school. Lummus and 25 other students enlisted in the Air Corps and signed up for a civilian flying school as a result of his visit. While waiting for the Army to call, and I explained earlier, back then it was the Army Air Corps. We didn't have an Air Force, and so it was the Army. While waiting for the Army to call, he went to the New York Giants. On December 7th, 1941, the Giants were playing their arch rival, the Brooklyn Dodgers. Around halftime, the Associated Press ticker in the press box gave out a message saying, "Airplanes identified as Japanese have attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor." The players continued the game, knowing nothing of the attack. The Giants lost, but went on to play the Chicago Bears in the NFL championship game. On October 11th, 2015, The Giants honored Lummus by inducting him into the New York Giants Ring of Honor. After the championship game, Lummus enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve January 1942. In May 1942, he was sent to the busy seaport of Mar Island as a military policeman and soon was promoted to corporal. On October the 18th, he enrolled at the Officers Training School at Quantico, Virginia. He graduated on December 18th and received a commission as a second lieutenant, and he was assigned to the 27th Marines, 5th Marine Division. In January 44, he was assigned as executive officer, Company F, 2nd Battalion, 27th Marines. In August 1944, the division was transferred where he boarded the USS Henry, and after 4 months of training, the division was assigned to the 5th Corps, Amphibious Corps, and would fight to take the island of Iwo Jima. Lummus was in the first wave of troops to land at Iwo Jima on February the 19th, 1945. He landed at 9 a.m. on the beach known as Red 1. He and his platoon spent the next 2 weeks incessantly fighting the dug-in Japanese. His initial duty was a liaison office for the 2nd Battalion, spotting targets on the slopes of Mount Suribachi for artillery and airstrikes. On March 6, he was given command of Company E's 3rd Rifle Platoon. On March 8th, his platoon was spearheading a final assault on an objective east of Katano Point near the northern edge of the island. Despite minor wounds received from grenade fragmentation, Lummus knocked out 3 enemy strongholds, well-fortified positions arranged to defend each other, which were preventing his platoon from reaching its objective. Following this action, he stepped on a landmine and was mortally wounded, losing his legs. While laying on the ground, he urged his platoon on until he was carried off to an aid station. At the aid station, he famously told the doctor, "Well, Doc, the New York Giants lost a mighty good end today." He was transferred to the field hospital where he underwent surgery, a transfusion of 18 pints of blood, but died of internal wounds on the operating table. He was first buried in the 5th Division Cemetery, and his body was later moved here to Ennis, Texas. A statue of Jack Lummus was unveiled on November the 28th, 2020, on the campus of Baylor University that he had attended, and it was installed in its current location near McLean Stadium. The statue, according to the university, was created to honor Jack Lummus and remind future generations of the rich tradition of bravery among alumni. I've got his Medal of Honor citation itself. Would y'all like to hear that? For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as leader of a rifle platoon attached to the 2nd Battalion, 27th Marines, 5th Marine Division in action against enemy Japanese forces on Iwo Jima and the Volcano Islands, 8 March 1945. Resuming his assault tactics with bold decision after fighting without respite for 2 days and nights, First Lieutenant Lummus slowly advanced his platoon against a deeply entrenched enemy. Suddenly halted by a terrific concentration of hostile fire, he unhesitantly moved forward of his front lines in an effort to neutralize the Japanese position. Although knocked to the ground when an enemy grenade exploded close by, he immediately recovered himself and again moving and destroyed the occupied emplacement. Instantly taken under fire by the slashing fury of hostile rifle fire, they use some pretty good language in this Medal of Honor stuff. He fell under the impact of a second enemy grenade, but courageously disregarding painful shoulder wounds, staunchly continued his heroic one-man assault and charged annihilating all the occupants. Subsequently returning to his platoon division, he fearlessly traversed his lines under fire, encouraging his men to advance and directed the fire of supporting tanks against others stubbornly holding Japanese emplacements. Held up by a devastating barrage, he again moved in the open, rushed a third heavily fortified installation, and killed the defending troops. So 3 installations he by himself killed them. By his outstanding valor, skilled tactics, and tenacious perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds, First Lieutenant Lummus has inspired his stout-hearted Marines to continue the relentless drive northward, thereby contributing materially to the success of his regimental mission. His dauntless leadership and unwavering devotion to duty throughout sustain and enhance the highest tradition of the U.S. Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life in service of his country.
We are going to be talking about the Rowe family. This is the 5th and final stop of your Myrtle Meander. And they are important to the Ennis history because, number one, they opened a lumber planing and cotton mill gin, and number two, their house was on the lot that is now our Ennis post office. So if you look here on the board, you can see what their house looked like. This actually isn't the first house that Alonzo built. There was another house prior to this, but this is the second house. It was located at 308 West Knox and was torn down sometime in the early 1960s when the post office expanded. We don't think it was torn down because the post office expanded, but more that it was in disrepair, so it couldn't be fixed or moved or anything like that. So Alonzo Hartman Rowe was born in Iredell County, North Carolina, April 30th, 1839. He was educated in North Carolina, and then following that he became a carpenter, which took him to South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. In 1860, when he was in Louisiana, he volunteered in the Confederate service, joining the Louisiana Volunteers. In the Battle of Pea Ridge, he was wounded in the right hip and fell into the hands of the enemy, but was able to escape after a few days. After he escaped, he made his way to a hospital in Little Rock, Arkansas, and then was later honorably discharged from the service on account of his wounds. After that, he ended up in North Carolina for a little bit, and then he ended up re-enlisting in Company K, 46th Volunteer Infantry, and he was in some of the most important engagements of the war, where he faithfully served until the surrender. In 1869, he made his way to Texas and settled in Jefferson, Marion County, where he engaged in business. It doesn't say what business, but seeing as he came to Ennis shortly after that and opened a cotton gin, we'd have to assume that it was some sort of cotton gin or lumber planing business. He came to Ennis in 1875 and engaged in cotton ginning, and he ginned perhaps more cotton than any other man in Ellis County, and he was very successful and accumulated a lot of good property. He married his wife, Miss Sarah Janelia Deal, in 1869, and she was of Lenoir, North Carolina. And in this union, they had 10 children, which is some of the graves that we see around us. So, in an interesting article in the Ennis Daily News in June 14th, 1922, Miss Winnie Loggins was able to interview Miss Janelia about 20 years after Alonzo passed away. Janelia said that they made the trip from Jefferson to Ennis by railroad, but had traveled from North Carolina by stagecoach. Miss Rowe stated that the Captain Latimer's first bank building on the corner of Main and Ennis Avenue was one of the first buildings, and it was just a small building made of lumber, so it wasn't the bank building that we see there now. The article states in 1877, Alonzo bought a plot of land and built a little 2-room house where he eventually built the house that's pictured here. He also built a planing mill and cotton gin. The planing mill only lasted about a year because it was so hard to get lumber. The Sanborn maps of 1884 and 1901 both show Rowe cotton gin and grist mill, but by 1909 it shows that it was called Farmers Gin Company. So seeing as he passed away in 1909, we're assuming sometime between 1901 and 1909, Genelia sold the cotton gin. The 10 children, 3 of them died in infancy, and we believe that their grave sites are right over here. There's 2 there. I want to say the little missing spot there was the 3rd gravestone, and it either is in disarray and got moved, or it could potentially be buried. Their surviving children were Minnie Catherine, who is up here, Lola, who we do not find buried here in this plot, Carrie, which is over here with her husband R.E. Lewis, John Shuford, who's not buried in this plot, Anna Genelia, is right over here, and then Willie Mae is beside her, and Josie, who's not buried here. Anna Genelia and Carrie were school teachers, and Willie Mae taught music in their home. Their daughter, Lola Lee Rowe, married Robert Fountain and lived at 309 Knox Street, which would be directly across the street from her parents. So I'm not sure if she's buried around the area, if they died in the area, or if they had moved off maybe after her parents passed away. Minnie Catherine, who's buried right up here, died of reoccurring breast cancer in 1934. And then Willie Mae died in 1958 as a result of a head-on collision in Trumbull off Highway 75. So a lot of trauma and heartbreak in their family. We were able to be in contact with the descendants of the youngest daughter, Josie Pauline Rowe Courtney. And according to Josie's great-granddaughter, Jane Ham, her grandmother met her husband, Harry Wood Courtney, through family connections. So Alonzo and Genelia were both originally from North Carolina, and Jane said that Harry, who Josie married, was also from North Carolina. None of the descendants of the family that we know of live in Ennis. Their only son, John Shuford Rowe, moved to Brownsville after graduating Baylor in Waco, and he is buried there. And Ennis resident Mavis Watkins was able to relay before her death that she remembers the Rowe sisters walking from their home to downtown Ennis, and Henrietta Novotny took music lessons from Willie Mae. Florence Sellers also remembers Genelia Rowe as her teacher at the old Alamo School. So as with all these families, there are many aspects of this family that are amazing and some that are sad. Sarah, Genelia, and Alonzo lost 3 children in infancy, and when visiting here, we noticed that Carrie and Robert also lost 3 children, but I think the oldest here is 3 years old, or 7. Josie's daughter, Margaret, who is Jane Ham's mother, married Magruder Tuttle, and he was a rear admiral and an officer most responsible for the establishment of the National Naval Aviation Museum. So all of these families have a story to tell. It's all very important, and I'm just so thankful that you could all be here today and just get a glimpse of what we have out at the cemetery and how important it is to the foundation of Ennis.